Okay, I got the recording going now. So welcome everybody to our Otter Talk, Otters 101. Ranger Stephen is joining us today. So Ranger Stephen, thank you for joining us. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about river otters and otters in Minnesota.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for that, Benji. So, yeah, my name is Stephen Walker. I work for the National Park Service, and I will just do a brief intro on the National Park Service, the park I work at, and then we'll get into the fun stuff, which is the river otter. So, the National Park Service manages about 433 national park units across the country, different from state parks, different from national forests. So we manage places like Arches, the Statue of Liberty, and I believe the only other park on the Mississippi River is the St. Louis Arch. But our park is the park that I work at is the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. It covers 72 miles of the river as it flows through downtown St. Paul and Minneapolis. And it was founded in 1988 by an act of Congress. So that map is kind of boring, but this is some of the stuff that we actually do in the park. We do a lot of kayaking and canoe programs. And of course, Ranger talks about river otters and other ecological topics. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about the river otter today. So just a little bit about me. I have previously worked at Crater Lake National Park, which is in Southern Oregon. And in 2022, I took a canoe and traveled down the entire length of the Mississippi River. So the middle photo is a photo of me on day one in Lake Itasca. And then the third photo is a photo of me on day 97 at the Gulf of Mexico. And this is one of the things that sort of nudged me to become a park ranger at MNRA, as we call it, the national park here, dedicated to the Mississippi River. So, speaking of that Mississippi River, we are going to talk about river otters today. And when you think about sort of mascots of the Mississippi River, I think a few come to mind, probably the bald eagle, the beaver, the catfish. But in my humble opinion, I think river otters are right up there with the heavy hitters. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the otter biology and the adaptations that they have that really help them survive in Minnesota wetlands and lakes, but also, of course, on the Mississippi River. We're going to talk about their history in the state of Minnesota. And then we're going to talk at the end about their relationship to Mississippi River and the floodplain forests that border the Mississippi River. And I'll have a few tips at the end of, ways that you can increase your odds of maybe seeing a river otter in the wild, because they are quite elusive. Okay, so these are our furry friends, the North American river otters. There's kind of a common misconception that they're rodents. They're actually not rodents, although beaver and muskrat, sort of similar species are. Otters are actually a member of the weasel family, and you can tell that by their sharp teeth in the first photo there. They can weigh up to 30 pounds and be up to 5 feet long. And a lot of that length is coming from their tail, which is almost as long as the rest of their body. Just before we fully get into it, I just want to differentiate. There are different kinds of otters. The main other one that people think of is the sea otter or the marine otter. And I just want to show you guys a little size comparison. I have I'll stop sharing the screen so you guys can see me better. I hope you guys can see this. So this right here is the river otter skull. It's about the size of my fist. And then here we have the sea otter skull, and that's at least twice as big as the river otter skull here. And that's not even the biggest species of otters. The biggest species of otters, as you saw in the slide, was the giant otter, which lives in South America. So I just wanted to show you that, and we're talking about one of, if not the smallest otter species that's out there. I'm going to see if I can share my screen again. Hopefully that's working. Hopefully you can see it again. So yeah, we're talking about the North American river otter today. And one of its most interesting adaptations is of course its fur, right? You can see in this photo that it's got that oily and sleek fur on it. And the oiliness helps with the waterproofing of the fur and the skin. And there's another adaptation that really helps with the waterproofing of the river otter, and that's that they actually have two layers of fur. So they have a really well. They have the outer layer, the coarse, the darker, the larger hairs on the outer, which you've seen, but they have a really, really dense undercoat layer. And what that undercoat layer actually does is when they dive under the water, it creates just a thin layer of micro small bubbles. And the bubbles are a great insulator, and they keep that inner layer of fur and then the river otter skin dry. In the inner layer of fur, they have 585 hairs per every square millimeter. So they're extremely, extremely dense. And of course, they need to have that waterproofness and that insulation and that impermeability because they're in the water so much. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but those qualities, the really soft, the really dense fur, led them to be really prized during the fur trade era as a trading commodity. And lots of clothing was made out of them. And of course, that was good because it's waterproof and it's warm. So it made for great clothing in the cold winters. And we will talk more about sort of the fur trading history and some of the more of that history in Minnesota in a bit. But I just wanted to put that out there that it was very practical to make clothing out of the river otter pelts. Okay, so let's talk about their head anatomy, their skull anatomy. So their nostrils and ears, they both have a muscular closing flap that allows them to become airtight when they dive under. Unlike humans and most other mammals, we don't have that. In addition, their nostrils are positioned very high on their snout. So if need be, they only need to poke their head out just a tiny bit to get a breath of air. They also have a nictitating membrane, is what it's called, but essentially a translucent underwater eyelid, a third eyelid that allows them to see underwater. And I wasn't able to find a good photo of an actual river otter with this eyelid, but the same principle applies, and they use that all the time when they're diving under. The other thing that they have that helps them hunt underwater is they have these extremely sensitive whiskers, which are particularly useful in some of our muddy rivers, like the Mississippi, the Minnesota rivers. They're both very sediment heavy, not high visibility. The river otters that are living on those rivers definitely rely a lot more on their whiskers than their eyesight when they're hunting underwater. So that's a fantastic adaptation that they have. And so I already mentioned this a bit ago, but they also have they're swimmers. They spend the grand majority of their time either in the water or right next to the water. They're much more protected from their land predators when they are either in the water, because not many of their predators are as streamlined and are as strong in the water as the river otter. So, or they'll be right next to the water. So they'll be able to run and hide into the water if need be. So yeah, 90% of their time is spent either in the water or right next to the water. And their body shape is also just totally optimized to be in the water. And I just love this next photo, which totally shows that they're sleek and they're fast in the water. The eyes are open under the water, and so they're just totally well suited to being underwater for long periods of time. So humans, we can hold our breath for maybe about 3 minutes. Most people without special training, at the very longest, and river otter can hold its breath for about 8 minutes. They can also dive pretty deep, 60 or 70 feet deep into the water if need be. And I learned this while researching. I didn't know this before, but baby river otters actually learn to swim at only 2 months old. So 2 months in the den, and then boom, they're right on the water. So pretty cool. And they are one of our few aquatic mammals that absolutely just thrives in the water. And so I want to share this video with you. It's a video that it shows an otter. I don't think the sound will come through, so I'm explaining a little bit, but it shows otters migrating from one fishing hole to the next. And like I said, they try and avoid this as much as possible. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, it's got the closed captioning on, but I'll just say that this video is showing essentially how awkward and vulnerable they are as they traverse land. And so this is just to show you that they really prefer to be in the water or near the water as much as possible, because they're very vulnerable to land predators if they're making these long treks like this. This video was actually taken in Yellowstone National Park. So just to drive home the point that these are aquatic mammals and they love to and need to be for their survival close to the water pretty much at all times. So some of their land predators would be bobcats, coyotes, raptors might prey on certainly some of the smaller ones, the young ones, bears, and in other parts of the countries, they're also hunted by alligators. So let's see here. Oops. Let's see if I can move on. There we go. Okay. Now, otter reproduction. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later too, but they actually have a very interesting sort of yearly reproduction cycle. And the female otter, so like most mammals, will give birth in the spring, but shortly thereafter, well within the spring, as they're raising their youngs, they will mate. But they don't actually give birth until the following spring. So they'll basically have it's called a delayed implantation, where they'll be impregnated, but that baby won't actually grow and develop until the winter and then the following spring. So I thought that was sort of interesting as I was researching this. Okay, and now let's talk about what they do to eat. So as you notice, they got the web feet, but of course they also have really sharp claws on their feet. They have really sharp teeth. They're the members of the weasel family. And so, yes, they do eat meat. They are carnivores. Unlike beavers and muskrats, which are herbivores, the river otter is a carnivore. So some things they eat, the most of their diet is fish, but they're definitely opportunistic, and they will eat pretty much anything that they can give their hands on. They have an extremely high metabolism, partially due to being underwater and having to stay warm, thermogenesis, but also their metabolism is high that they need to eat pretty constantly. So they'll also go for crayfish, turtles, amphibians, sometimes even ducks, yes, and our freshwater Mississippi mussels. And otters are pretty smart. I'm sure you've seen the sea otter, breaking up an oyster on its back. the river otters can get pretty sneaky or pretty smart when it comes to preying on those freshwater mussels. They can take them and smash them on a rock. They can drop them from height and then devour the mussel that's on the inside. So I thought that they're a pretty creative species. Where you might find them is you might find them in most common, especially if you're in a lake, is just some of these dens, pretty similar looking to a beaver den, but you'll see less of that shoe marks that you might see on a beaver den on the wood. So that's where you can find them. And I just want to go over a little bit about the history of river otters in Minnesota. So this graph shows the dark line shows their population over time. It's actually an estimate. It's not a confirmed count, but it's sort of an estimate of their population. And due to the fur trade, due to the North American fur trade of the 1800s primarily, their population plummeted in Minnesota. And this graph only starts at 1977, but most people estimate the low point for river otters to be around 1880 or 1890, maybe 1900 or so, at the height of the fur trade. And the estimates is that it got below 5,000. Kind of estimates are between 3,000 and 5,000 in the state of Minnesota. Now that might seem like a lot, but for a land of 10,000 lakes and 6,000 rivers, including 70,000 miles of river shoreline, 3,000 is not all that much, right? And so the underpopulation was really stark, and in fact, they completely disappeared from most of southern Minnesota, the whole Minnesota River Valley, and most of the lower Mississippi in our state. From downtown St. Paul to the Iowa border was very, very, very sparsely populated. And this underpopulation was, of course, due to the hunting, like I mentioned, but also with the overhunting of the beaver, there was less wetland, less habitat for the river otter. So that sort of like they sort of work together to also push down the otter population. So they're definitely linked. Beavers are a keystone species. And so that factor also indirectly just lowered the population of river otters in our state. Now, it stayed pretty much at that low level, under 5,000 for at least 70, 80 years until about 1970. And 1972 was the Clean Water Act. And it was at that time when they started to naturally, without Minnesota DNR intervention, just sort of naturally start to just slowly climb up. And you can see where the graph starts in 1977. There looks to be about 8,000 or so statewide. So that's sort of like it's coming back naturally due to beavers coming back, but also the water quality really increasing. But what they noticed is that those river otters were not really spreading out. So they were increasing in the areas that they already were, primarily the northern part of the state, but they weren't coming back to the Minnesota River Valley. They weren't coming back to the lower Mississippi. And so in about 1980, so here's, history of the river otter in Minnesota. In about 1980, the Minnesota DNR set out to increase or to restore the river otter to its historical range in southern Minnesota. So what they did is they trapped river otters from up north and they reintroduced them along the Minnesota River. And they took 11 otters in the fall of 1981, and they trapped them. This was all sort of like volunteer trapping, if you will, citizen trapping. when a citizen live trapped a river otter, they would call the DNR, and the DNR would come pick it up and transplant it. So they transplanted 11 river otters in 1980, and then another 11 in 1981. And so 22 river otters, that's all it took to totally replenish um, the population in southern Minnesota. And you can see this is a photo of them being released in the Minnesota River Valley. But since then, they've been able to reproduce and spread out along that waterway on their own. The Iowa DNR did a similar. Oh, and here's a recent photo of them on the Minnesota River. So a whole family of otters. Um, and the Iowa DNR did a similar reintroduction of river otters on the lower Mississippi, just south of the border. And so they've also replenished the Mississippi River in our state. And so bringing it back to this graph, now there's about 20,000 in our state. When I reached out about this graph, it does show 25,000 or more in the state, but the DNR biologist suspected that that was sort of an over representation, that the model was not really taking into account carrying capacity, because but basically between 20 and 25,000 river otters live in our state today, and they're pretty much at carrying capacity in most of their regions, right? So, oh, and the last thing, because I work at the Mississippi River National Park, the estimate is that about 1,000 live on the Mississippi River, anywhere in this state from Lake Itasca down to the border with Iowa. And so that means that approximately 5% of the statewide otters are living in the Mississippi River, or the floodplain forest right nearby, floodplain lakes. So let's talk about that. The photo on the left is well, we live in this park in a floodplain forest. So what that means is it seasonally will flood, typically from all the snow melt and all that being concentrated down. And so it floods for humans and it floods for animals. So the photo on the left is a photo of Shepherd Road near downtown St. Paul. That was last year in early, mid-June, perhaps, or maybe late June, when we had pretty good flooding. And it wasn't the record, but it was pretty high. And here's another photo of Raspberry Island, Harriet Island. And so flooding of the river can be somewhat devastating to humans and human structures. But for the wildlife and animals, it's actually very healthy. A floodplain forest, like the one that exists in much of our park, actually needs to be replenished every year. Now, when the I'll just show this little graphic. I don't know if you can see if it works. Yeah, so when the river floods, it sort of spills over into all those lakes, those floodplain lakes that are right nearby, and allows fish and other animals to travel freely in between. I'll just show that. Pause it right there. Yeah. So, so these flooding events, I think a lot of conventional knowledge would say, oh, flooding is harmful and let's contain this. But flooding nourishes the soil with all the nutrients that are spilling over from the Mississippi River, but also it allows for a safe haven for fish when they go into those interior lakes, a safer spawning ground. And essentially it means more fish, and more fish means more otters. So the otters will definitely love it when the river will flood over its banks. And another reason that they really love the floodplain forest is that it scours out the roots of especially cottonwood trees that are right on the riverbank, right? So river otters in our park are often seen in these nooks and crannies that are scoured out in the cottonwood root systems. And, why make a den like the one I showed you earlier when you can be totally protected? And here, let the river do the work for you, as we say. So that's a little bit of the link to our park. Now let's talk about how you can hopefully increase your odds of seeing some river otters on the Mississippi River. And this will apply to other places as well. Well, the easiest way is to be a National Park Service biologist and just set up a game camera and just be monitoring 24/7. This was made by our biologist who caught this really funny scene on one of their game cams at 12:46 a.m. So it's definitely easiest to see them not at the typical human hours, because they'll be active more at dusk, overnight, but you can see them in the daytime too. And in a more serious way, the main thing that you can look for is what we call these otter slides, right? You can sort of see it's basically the otter's highway to and from their den. And with enough time, it'll start to create this sort of slide pattern. Here's another example of that slide, right? And the other thing you can look for, which is highly correlated with the slide, especially after a nice rainfall or after the river has receded, is looking for the tracks. And the telltale sign for the river otter tracks is you got the two sets of tracks, one on either side, and then you have the tail drag. If you see that towards the upper side of the picture, you see that tail drag. And that's a telltale sign of an otter. A beaver will have a similar looking tail or track and footsteps, but they'll be deeper into the ground, but also they won't have as thin of a tail drag because their tail is much larger, like a paddle. So they'll have a much more washed out sort of tail drag. So that's one tip to sort of differentiate the two. But look for these signs and you'll increase your odds of seeing river otters. And then, of course, going out at dusk is a good time to do so. So let's see if this will play. So this was taken in Fort Snelling State Park, which is within the Mineral Corridor, and it's right around dusk, and they're active all winter, as is shown in the video. Dusk is a great time to go scope out those otter slides and see what you can see. There's actually a lot in the, so this is in the back channel of Pike Island or Witatonka. And so that little back channel, there's tons of beaver, tons of river otters. That's a great spot to go looking for them. And I'll just point out one other thing is that they also will just be in burrows like this. So especially in a muddy, softer soil, you can definitely see them just coming out of holes in the ground. They don't necessarily stay in those sort of den shelters or the cottonwood roots, but they'll stay in these little dugout dens in our park, especially because we have a lot of muddy areas. So let's see if I can move past that. All right, and one last video for you guys before I wrap it up. Here is a very cute video of a river otter slide. So some of their most gregarious, endearing activities is doing the slides. Oops. There we go. So that's all I have for you folks today. Thanks for joining in. And if there are any questions about the wonderful river otters, I'd love to hear them. I will say that I'm not necessarily an expert in river otters myself. I'm more focused on the Mississippi River and the history and the ecology of the river as a whole. So I might not be able to answer all of your questions about the river otters, but I will certainly try my best.
Ranger Stephen, thanks so much for your knowledge and sharing. It's such a cool species just to see. I think my favorite time to see otters was winter camping or cross country skiing in the winters, and you see a lot of tracks through little slides. It's just they're such a fun, playful bunch of critters. It's a lot of fun. So
Definitely. It's easier to see the tracks in the winter. That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but that's a great point.
so we got a couple questions popping in
Yeah.
here. So if anybody does have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A section found in the lower right hand corner under the ellipsis there. Also, the chat function is there if you want to link to the Mississippi Park Connection or any of the links we shared there or in the chat function. So Janelle put a couple questions in here. In one, she's seen otter in a specific area before, it doesn't seem there anymore. And she's wondering if they're territorial or if they travel wherever the food is.
Yes, both. They're very territorial in terms of their scent glands and their pheromones. They will definitely repel other river otters and other species away. They also have a very distinctive sort of marking territory with their scat. They'll actually, it's called a skeint mound, and they basically will take their scat and sort of like have this like mucky clear layer on it that just smells terrible that they add to their scat. And so anyway, all that to say is yes, they're very territorial. But yes, they'll also be opportunistic about their feed. And if a fishing hole has dried up, like I said, they can't last long. They need to eat. That metabolism's running. They will definitely look, and they do so most often in the winter. Like that video showed, if the ice is frozen over, they could have one fishing hole that's open water, hunt, and as soon as they've cleared out that area of the easy to catch fish, they'll just move on to the next one. And if spring finds them in a different spot, they might just stay there.
Right. Great. Gary was wondering if woodchucks are related to otters.
So otters are in the weasel family, and I don't believe that woodchucks are. I believe those
I
are
believe
herbivores. I think
in the
they might be
rodent family.
rodents as well. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So
yeah.
Janelle was wondering, how do otter know where hibernating turtles are? She's seen them where they've dug them up along the riverbanks and just left their shells in the ice.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know the exact answer. I'll have to ask our biologist and get back to you. But my guess is that a lot of times you can actually see turtles because they'll just burrow under. And so as the winter goes deeper and deeper, they'll go farther and farther under. But there are plenty of times where you can just see exactly where the turtle is through the ice and it's just sort of frozen in the water. So if you're an opportunistic hunter, that might be an easy catch for you.
Yeah. Rachel was wondering about what predators otters have in kind of an urban environment like the Twin Cities. Do you see them in the urban environment, or is it mainly just along the rivers? And
Yeah, actually, when was it? Well, for me, I'm out on the river a fair bit, so you increase your chances just by being out there more. But I saw one only 2 weeks ago. It was right near Harriet Island, right near downtown St. Paul, just upstream of Harriet Island. And so, yeah, they're definitely around. It's just a question of coming out at the right time to see them. They're very elusive. When I saw this otter, I saw it emerge from the water. It was on land, visible for only about 4 seconds. Boom, into its den and gone. So you kind of have to be really quick about it because they don't like to be seen, especially during daylight hours. But yeah, no, we have. I should get the exact numbers, but we have quite a few river otter and river otter families in our 72-mile stretch of the Mississippi River. Yeah.
and if you want to get out there and see stuff, you got to actually get out there and see it. So spend some time on the river. We are super fortunate in Minnesota to have all the public access we do and the great state parks and the national parks we have here. So get out as much as you can. It's just going to increase your interest in the species and increase your ability to see them too. So Richard has a really unique question here, and I'm kind of curious what your take is. Can you tell in the Minnesota otter's genome that they went through a genetic bottleneck? due to their low numbers in the 1880s. I wonder if anybody's ever looked at that.
Yeah. I'm going to write that down because I don't know the answer. Um, that's a great question. I'm going to reach out and try and find the answer to that, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah. Lee was wondering, does the Minnesota National Park have a public otter cam that people can watch?
Our park does not have a public one. That might change in the future. But we have plenty of game cams monitoring many species, not just otters, for our wildlife technicians to monitor species and follow trends. But no, we don't have any public one, as far as I'm aware.
I wonder if
I
the zoo
wish, though.
does.
That'd be great.
Yeah, it'd be a good thing for the zoo to put up. The Minnesota
Yeah,
Zoo has otters there, so.
yeah, that's right.
Janelle's wondering, will otters share a den with the beaver or take over old beaver dens?
That they won't share. They definitely won't share. And I don't know this for sure, but my intuition tells me that they would take over an old beaver den if they were there, because same with the like the scoured out cottonwood root system root ball. Like if there's a ready-made shelter, they'll move in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Very opportunistic.
exactly, and very very intelligent. Yeah.
Yeah. Dorothy was wondering if they're always able to find open water, or how do they find open water in the winter when everything's froze?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on the Mississippi River, there's usually always patches here and there of open water. Um, with lakes, for example, what they'll do is they'll actually, so they'll when the ice is thin, they're able to break through and cause, basically make a little hole for themselves. And what they'll do is once that hole is made, they'll add like grasses and little weeds and clippings and stuff that prevents it from freezing evenly, so they can keep that area of ice thin and just keep use. So even if they constantly will use a hole throughout the entire winter, they'll keep that hole free of ice even if the rest of the ice is 12 inches thick or more, right? So that's kind of a cool thing that also just shows off their intelligence, that they're able to maintain their access even when it's totally frozen off and we need tools to get through as humans. But they've found their ways to maintain their access to the lake.
Yeah. And there's a lot of springs and stuff that flow in and out of lakes and
That
rivers
too.
and whatnot that have open spots. So
Yes.
they tend to be able to, I don't know, sniff those out or find them somehow. So
Well, I'm sure they just come back to the same spots every year that they know work well. And like I said, they can hold the breath for 8 minutes. So they can they can cover a lot of distance even from one access point.
Leo's wondering, is there any known current research on Minnesota river otters?
I don't know if there's any research other than monitoring. But I should look into that. I don't know. But I know that their population is monitored by the DNR and by our park. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Sarah's wondering, how many young do they usually have?
I guess I don't know the exact numbers, but I've seen 2, 3, and 4 a lot. So my impression is that that's sort of the common amount. You can definitely see big river otter families, so they can get up to 4.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
See, Carol was wondering if they ever attack loons. I've never heard of loon otter interactions, but
My guess is yes. They have been known to prey on ducks. So certainly, if they were faced with, especially like a juvenile loon, my guess is yes, it's happened before.
again, opportunistic, right?
Exactly. Yeah, when I showed the photo of all their food sources, that was not an exhaustive list. They will eat a lot of stuff.
Chris is wondering if you know how much food they eat an average day, or how far they travel from their den in an average day. It is. I combined two questions there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I don't know about the average food. That's a great question. I never thought to to look that up, but I'm gonna find the answer for you. And as for the den, on a typical day, especially in the summer, anytime that there's not ice, they won't go that far from their den. They'll stay local. Um, and if they do get far from their den, they're going to be far in the water. So they might travel, a mile upstream or something, but they'll always be in that protected water. They would, I think, very rarely do that sort of distance on land.
Great. Janelle was wondering, did otters stay together as a family, or do the young get kicked out for the next year when the next year's young are born?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how long they stay with their parents. My guess is either 1 or 2 seasons, but I don't know when they reach that sort of separation time. That's a good question.
Jeff was wondering about times that they're seeing. You usually see them early in the morning or late at night. So I think that's generally the best time to see them when you're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you see them during broad daylight, they're probably just going to be that really quick out of the water into their den. You have a better chance of seeing them in the day if it's in a really shaded spot. If there's like overhanging trees hanging over the river or lake, you might have more of a chance of seeing them there. But yeah, your best bet is dawn and dusk, as most species are that are also prey.
Uh, Brenda, hi Brenda. She said she ran across an otter up in New Brighton just the other day. So they are close to the urban area.
And let me guess, it was near a body of water.
Probably. He said they did have an otter cam at the zoo before, but she doesn't think it's currently active at this time. So,
Good deal.
Leo was asking, do you need volunteers to identify individual species from game cameras? There's actually an app that does that. I don't know if you're familiar with that. They collect, actually it's Grace from the University of Minnesota. They collect a lot of game camera things, and you can actually volunteer to help identify stuff. So if you're interested, reach out to me. I can connect you with Grace. They're always looking for volunteers. There's actually an organization that does that. So
Right on.
John was wondering if there's a purpose in the sliding or if it's just plain fun.
Well, it's definitely both. That's a great question. So they will definitely. Let's see if I can go. Oh wait, I'm not presenting anymore. But basically, there was that mud slide, and essentially that's their highway back from the water to their den, and so they'll slide up and down multiple times each day. But of course, they love to have fun while doing it, and they will definitely play, especially the pups will definitely play as they go up and down, and especially so in the snow in the winter, like that last video that I showed. So it's part function and part play.
I have one of those, like a Norwegian kick sled that I
Yeah,
used to have with my kids and stuff. We take out in the lake, and it reminds me of seeing the otters out there because they run really fast and they slide, and they run and then they slide. It's just like we do in the kick sled. It's
yeah.
got to be
And
fun.
like a smooth transition. They're running and then they're gliding and then they run again. Yeah.
Jeanette was wondering if otter are hard of seeing like beavers, or if they see pretty well.
If if the beaver sees well, I mean, if the otter sees well.
Yeah, if the otter sees well, I guess beavers don't see very well. But
I didn't realize that. I don't know for sure. My guess is that they see pretty well because they're a predator. They have to follow these motions and movement of the fish that are underwater. But that being said, they also have other adaptations like the whiskers I mentioned that help them hunt too. But my guess, they got those forward facing, um, you know, monocular vision, where they're looking for that prey. So my guess is they have pretty good eyesight. But I can check and get you an answer on that.
Paul has an interesting story. He said they had they located a mother in a nest in their barn, which is at least a half mile from the water. Seems like quite a distance, but he's wondering if that was normal. And he says a follow-up, she was very protective, which kept us from accessing the barn for a while. Is there something we can do in the future to keep them from nesting in the barn?
Yeah, that strikes me as very odd. I don't know if when you say the water, there perhaps like, a wetland or even a pond nearby that wasn't like a big body of water. Maybe they were attracted to that. But no, that strikes me as uncommon.
Yeah, it seems a little strange, but
Yeah.
Richard is wondering if otters mate for life, or is there a social structure to their
Wow, you
family?
guys are asking great questions. I don't know the answer to that one. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna ask.
He did talk about them mating, and they mate in the spring, and then it's a delayed
Yep,
impregnation, so
delayed
they give birth
implantation.
in the spring.
Exactly. Yeah. So they'll give birth and then mate, just 2 weeks after they give birth or so, and then but that actual like implantation will be delayed until the following winter. 7 months, 8 months later, and then which actually I was telling a story about them relocating otters, and it was kind of interesting because they played into that where they did all their relocating in the fall, and they were targeting the female otters that were hopefully already pregnant, but they didn't mess with their mating season at all because their mating was already done from early in the spring. They trapped and relocated them all in the fall, and that really
Interesting.
helped with the relocation and efforts. Yeah.
Cool. Mark has a question here. Mark, I better not see a T-shirt of this, but he's wondering if otters are friendly to humans if they run across one of us during their day-to-day activities. So nobody's petting otters. Let's get that clear.
No, definitely not. They view us as a threat. They have really sharp teeth. I wouldn't recommend it.
So we got more questions coming in. Um, Another one on. So we gotta scroll back down here. Oh, Grace answered me back. So Zooniverse is the project. I forget who asked about IDing animals on trail cams. Thanks, Grace. I think it was Lee. If you're interested in identifying animals, Zooniverse is the project that helps with that. So thanks for answering that, Grace. Good to see you're on. AJ answered back too. They do have excellent eyesight underwater, in land, and night vision. In Minnesota, typically 8 up to 20 members of a male and female are not mated couples, so they must live in kind of groups here and there. So
Yeah, definitely seen, the family groups. I didn't realize they could get that big.
yeah, we got a couple of biologists and stuff helping us answer questions. We really appreciate that. So
Amazing.
I think that's all we have for questions that I'm seeing in there. We're getting close to being out of time. I did want to make another announcement too. This is our 214th episode. Our summer schedule is a little bit delayed this year. Our good friends Craig Kiger and Jeff Letterman both retired here earlier this month, and we're just working to fill our summer program as much as we can, but we're going to start a couple weeks late this year. So keep an eye out for our summer programs. Those will be coming out probably on Monday for registration, and we'll be starting the third week of June with our summer programming. So appreciate everybody joining us today. Oh, Casey's sending me a note too. I might have missed a couple questions in here. I'll take one more quick peek.
Oh, all right.
So you got most of them. So David was wondering if North American otters are related to those in Europe and Asia. You know,
I think historically, but not recently. I can double check on that too. Yeah.
And Jim wants you to share all your secrets, not related to otters. He wants your favorite bass fishing area on the Mississippi River.
Oh,
So
see that? No, no, that's not public information.
someplace down south, I'm guessing. But
Yeah.
so
Well, I just wanted to say if you want to learn more about our national park, I think the link was in the chat, but we're the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And our friends group is called the Mississippi Park Connection. They do a ton of events year round. They do volunteer events, things like that. And then if you want, I'm just putting a shameless self plug in, but we're doing a canoe paddle with a ranger if you want to canoe from basically Brooklyn Park to Boom Island in Minneapolis and be on a big 10-person canoe. That's going to be on June 21st, I believe it is, and I think a link was sent in the chat for that. If you want to, be out there with us and looking for river otters and eagles and turtles and all that things, we'd love to have you guys there.
you pass by the big heron rookery north of
We
Minneapolis
do
too, don't you?
indeed. Yep. And well, this is totally off topic because it's not river otters, but our park just surveyed the herons, and there's 702 adult herons and over 1,000 chicks there right now. So that's
So
gonna be
wow,
a highlight, yeah, of the trip.
if you haven't had an
Wow.
opportunity to canoe that part of the Mississippi River, I've unlike you, I did not canoe the whole Mississippi River. I've canoed almost the whole Mississippi through the state of Minnesota over the years, but it's a really cool for an urban area on the Mississippi River. It's pretty spectacular going through the Twin Cities like that on the river. So if you haven't done that before, take an opportunity, join the National Park Service and get on a boat and do that. It's a cool way to see the cities and explore a little bit more in Minnesota. That's right in our backyard. We don't get to see it enough. So thanks everyone for joining us. We will see you in a few weeks for our summer program. I hope kids are getting out of school. Summer's here. Get outside, enjoy it. Enjoy it while you can. Bring a friend, bring a kid. Get outside and have a safe start to your summer. And we will see you in a few weeks. Ranger Stephen, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk again.
Thanks for having me.